Welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about spark plugs. There's a few things you need to consider when it comes to spark plugs. The selection of plugs, the gapping of plugs, and the indexing of plugs. So let's start with selection. This little Mustang engine has AFR 165 aluminum heads. When you switch to aluminum heads, virtually all of these cylinder heads require a gasket seat or washer seat style plug, like this NGK FR5. The NGK FR5 is my usual choice for a street engine like this. If you need colder plugs in the NGK lineup, you got to go to the BKR series. And with NGK, the higher the number, the colder it is. So BKR 6EY, for instance, or a 6 series plug, which is a range colder than this. Your stock motor uses a tapered seat plug like this. This is actually a Motorcraft plug, used one out of a Mustang. You cannot mix the two. And if you have a modified car, especially with aftermarket heads like this, and you go to the parts store and say, hey, sell me some spark plugs for a 90 Mustang, let's say, they're going to give you these tapered seat plugs, and they are totally wrong. They won't seal right. They can actually wedge in there and damage the threads in your aluminum heads. And in most cases like this, you can see they're the wrong reach. So you're not going to get the spark the way that you want in there. That's a big problem. It's one I see fairly often. Make sure you selected the right plugs. If in doubt, go to your cylinder head manufacturer and ask them what plugs they recommend. You can also go to online cross references. So like if your brand of choice is NGK and the cylinder head maker, like with AFR, recommend Autolite, in this case they recommend Autolite 3924, you can cross-reference them and find out that FR5 is a straight-up replacement for Autolite 3924. So get the right kind of plugs. The next thing is the gap. So when it comes to gapping plugs, I see this all the time. Guys have the plugs gapped wrong. They put them in straight out of the box. They think they're gapped out of the box, and so on. Don't take a chance with it. Make sure that you gap these plugs before you put them in. There's a couple different kinds of gap tools. This style here, I find, is quite strong for bending the ground strap on the plug. It's a wire style gap tool, but the problem with this tool is it only goes up to 040, so it doesn't have a heavy enough wire for the typical gap you want on a naturally aspirated Mustang. This style of gap tool has an open wire on the end, which allows you to pull it through in certain cases where you couldn't get the enclosed wire through. There are certain applications, not usually with a Foxbody Mustang, but that's a perfectly okay tool to use for gapping. Again, I find this performance tool, the bender part of it, you can see this one's more or less wrecked. They're weak and they don't work worth a damn for that. So usually I end up using one of these other gappers for the gap and the round one to actually modify the gap. And then this tool here is a combo tool, which is probably a good choice. I think it's a performance tool. It says it's part number W80529. It's a feeler gauge tool, so there's automotive feeler gauges. That's helpful to have. You should definitely have that. It's got a gap tool. Again, you can see this one is bent. It's not in very good shape. And then it's got enclosed wire style gap checkers, which go up to 045, which is about the gap that you want on a Mustang like this. Okay, so to gap the plug, what do? It's really simple if you haven't done one before. You take it out of the box. Be careful you don't drop it. You select the part of the tool that's got your target gap. In this case, it's 045 We're going to stick that wire in there, and we can see it doesn't quite go in. This is gapped a little bit on the tight side. So then we grab our adjuster, and we're just going to bend this slightly open like that. Then we're going to try the 045 gap again, and I think I went a little bit too far. So then we'll try bending it. I don't know if you can see this. We'll bend it slightly closed. We'll try that gap again. Perfect. So there's just a little bit of drag here. Pulls through with just a little bit of drag, and that gap is perfect. If you're have the unfortunate job of gapping Ford power tip plugs, like in a 3-valve Mustang or F-150 or whatever, you might need a little tool like this. This tool, you thread the plug into the end of the tool, and then you can clamp this tool in your vise on the bench, and then you use an Allen key, and you can press this little set screw down through there to depress that plug. And that power tip plug is a U-shaped ground strap. So when you press on it, you can just press that little electrode down, or the ground strap down towards the electrode. And for something like that, you need to use an open-ended gap tool like this, or in a pinch you can use a drill bit. So you can either select a drill bit based on a chart that came with your set of drill bits, or you can use a caliper to measure a drill bit and find one that's the target gap, and and use the drill bit to check the gap with the power tip plugs. So what's a good gap? The factory gap for a motor like this, naturally aspirated, running on pump gas, modest compression. This one's 9, probably a little bit better than 9-to-1. It's got 58 cc heads and a little thinner head gasket. Is 045. But if you have a supercharger, nitrous, you want the gap tighter. Usually for blower applications, in most cases, I recommend 030. And that's right across the board. You know, if you have a Terminator or GT500 or something like that, 030 is about the right gap for those. And you'll see guys online say, oh, gap them 032 or 035. Well, they probably work that way. If you go too wide, the spark will blow out, and that'll cause you trouble. But I want you to remember this. That gap is never tighter than the moment you put it in the car. So over time, the ground strap will erode slightly, and that gap will get bigger. So if you start out 030 and it runs fine at 032, when it burns 2 thou off of the ground strap from operation, the car doesn't suddenly start misfiring. It's still okay. So use 030. That's my recommendation usually. So what can I do with a set of plugs to make more power? Well, with a pushrod Ford like this, the number one thing you can do is index them. Now, indexing plugs, I've tried on the dyno. With a pushrod street motor like this, we gain 3 to 5 horsepower with only the indexing job done. On a modular Ford, I've tested that on the dyno and gained nothing. It was a waste of time. But on one of these, it's worth it. You're going to get 3 to 5 horsepower, and it's going to cost you nothing generally, except for a little bit of time. So when it comes to indexing plugs, what your objective is to unshroud the spark. So what you want to do is make sure that the spark is open to the intake valve. Okay, so if the plug is installed the wrong way around, the ground strap shrouds the spark kernel, and then you get a slower ignition. That's why you get more power from indexing it. So you want to arrange it so that the ground strap is open towards the intake valve. Now, you can have this rotated in a bunch of different ways. But the idea is, if the intake valve is at the top here, just for argument's sake, if I have it like this, the ground strap shrouds the spark kernel. If I have it anything from about there all the way around to something like there, let's say, the spark kernel is open to the intake valve, and it's going to give you a better ignition event. So that's what you mean by indexing. Now there's several ways to do it. If you really need to have all your plugs right, usually you need to buy 2 sets of plugs. So on a motor like this, typically if I start with 16 plugs, I go through the indexing process. I'm going to come up with a set of 8 that I really like. But if you just start with 8 plugs and you do what I'm going to show you how to do here, you're going to end up with probably 5 that you really like and a couple that are really okay and maybe 1 that you don't like that much. But that's without buying any more plugs. It's just a matter of doing the index work. And that's what most of you guys are going to do. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on plugs, although, you know, plugs like this are $3 a piece or something like that. So it's not that expensive to buy a second set. Okay, so when the motor's together like this, what do you need to index it? A Sharpie, plug wrench, and some anti-seize, which you should always use on a set of plugs like this. So you take your set of plugs, and for each plug, you're going to take and draw a line on the plug. Your choice, but I usually draw it on corresponding to the open side of the plug. So if you see that, I've got a line on there which corresponds to the open side of the plug. Okay, you do that for your whole set of 8 plugs. Then you're going to take your plug and you're going to feed it into the first hole. Always use a spark plug socket. They have a rubber isolator in there which protects the spark plug insulator so that you don't break the ceramic insulator on the plug. You break the ceramic insulator on the plug, you got to throw that plug away and get another one. Same thing if you drop them. Be careful not to drop them. That little rubber isolator usually helps hold on to the plug as well when you're taking it in and out. Okay, so we've got that started. Got it just threaded up. What you're going to find with a washer seat plug or a gasket seat plug is the first time you install them, that gasket is going to compress. So I've threaded that in just finger tight until it just stopped, but we're still going to get a little bit of compression on this gasket. You don't want to go nuts on applying too much torque here, but what you're going to find is as you tighten this, you're going to feel that washer crush, and then it's suddenly going to get stiffer. That's enough. The first time you install it, you're going to crush the washer seat. If you take it out and reinstall it, the washer seat is already crushed, so you're not going to feel that initial drag. It's going to, when it tightens up, it's going to be tight enough right away. So what happened here is the line is right here. So my intake valve is here on the head. That is a fairly poor installation. It's fairly shrouded. So I'm going to take this one out. We don't like it in this cylinder number 1. I'm going to take that out and I'm going to try it in the next cylinder. Now, if you didn't put anti-seize on during the indexing, that's okay. It keeps your fingers a little cleaner, but you've got to take the plug out and put anti-seize on it before you get to your final install. Okay, that looks just as bad. And I've found these days with these CNC cylinder heads, a lot of the times the spark plug holes, the threading on the spark plug holes all starts at the same point, which means if the plug looks bad in cylinder in the first cylinder on this head. It's probably going to look about the same in every cylinder on this head. Right, that looks bad there too. And it'll most likely look bad here. The plug manufacturing isn't nearly as careful. So that's where the variances are that allow you to do this and get it right. Okay, so that looks virtually identical. It's not a great look for this cylinder head. So let's take that plug out. We're going to try it on the other side. But we're going to thread in the first hole. Let's see how this one looks. There, it tightened up. Okay, so now my index mark is like this. That's a lot better. That's going to have the spark kernel open to the valve. It's not as good as I would like. Ideally, I would have it on the bottom here, but this is going to work. And because we know we know that every one of these is threaded the same way, we need to, when we get a little victory like this, accept it. So we're going to take that as a win. We're going to go ahead and go through this whole set, just testing them in each one of these holes until we find a hole that we like. We'll mark that plug for that cylinder. Then we've got an index set of plugs. So this is a quick index designed to make the most out of a set of plugs without spending too much time on them or buying additional plugs. And I'll show you the end results, okay? This one, acceptable. This one, I like. This one, acceptable. This one, acceptable. Around here, this one, it's acceptable, but I'd sooner it be rotated a little bit more this way. This one, I like. This one, acceptable. And this one here, well, it's not great. If I had another plug, I'd try it in there. But this is fairly typical result for this style of index. You get 6 or 7 that are either acceptable or you like, and you get 1 or 2 that you don't like that much. But you're going to do better this way than if you just slap them in willy-nilly. The payoff for this operation is usually in the 3 to 5 horsepower range on the dyno. So that's some free power just from messing around test fitting plugs. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell so that you won't miss out on future videos.